What if I told you that there is a disease that can spread without being alive? No heartbeat, no cell, no bacteria, no virus, no tiny creature hiding under a microscope rubbing its hands together like it has rent. It's just a shape, a protein, folded the wrong way. And that wrong shape can walk into the brain like a bad idea and teach other proteins how to become wrong too. That sounds like science fiction. It sounds like something a writer invented after drinking too much coffee at 2 a.m. But it is real. And for a long time, it confused scientists so badly that the answer almost sounded insulting. Because usually, when something spreads from one body to another, we know what kind of suspect we are looking for: a virus, a bacterium, a parasite, a fungus, something alive, or at least something with genetic instructions, something with DNA or RNA, something that can copy itself. So, when doctors saw certain brain diseases behaving like infections, they did what made sense. They searched for the invader, they looked for a virus, they looked for bacteria, they looked for something with genes, something with a body, something that could be killed. And the strangest part was they kept finding nothing. The disease was there, the damage was there, the brain was changing, but the criminal kept leaving no fingerprints. Imagine a detective story where every victim is real. Every crime scene is real. Every clue says something came through here. But there are no footprints in the mud, no weapon, no suspect, no shadow on the security camera, just damage and silence. That was the mystery. Some of these diseases made the brain look almost sponge like under a microscope. Tiny holes destroyed tissue, a person slowly losing movement, memory, speech, personality, sleep, or control over their body. And once symptoms began, the disease often moved brutally fast. Rare, yes, but terrifying because they were so hard to understand. One version affected sheep, one version affected cattle, one version became known through mad cow disease. In humans, one of the best known prior diseases is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. There are genetic forms, there are spontaneous forms, there are acquired forms, and there are rare, almost nightmare like versions, like fatal familial insomnia, where the thing that disappears is sleep. Not bad sleep, not I stayed up too late scrolling and now I have the personality of a cracked phone screen. Actual sleep. The brain loses its ability to sleep properly. And because sleep is not a luxury item, the body begins to fall apart. But for today, the deepest mystery is not just what these diseases do, it is what they are. Because the answer changed how we think about infection. The word is prion. A prion is not alive. It is not a virus. It's not a bacteria. It is a protein. And proteins are supposed to be normal. Your body uses proteins for almost everything. They help build structure, carry signals, do chemical jobs, support cells, make life possible. A protein is not just a random string floating around like a loose charging cable. It has a shape, and shape matters. In biology, shape is not decoration, shape is function. A key works because of its shape. A lock works because of its shape. A folded airplane flies or falls because of its shape. Folded in one way, it glides. Folded in another way, it almost dives into the floor like it has accepted defeat. Proteins are like that. They fold into specific forms so they can do specific jobs. But sometimes a protein folds wrong. Usually, cells have cleanup systems for this. The body has ways to notice damaged proteins, refold them, recycle them, or remove them. It is not perfect, but it tries. Your cells are basically running a tiny quality control department all day. Little biological inspectors walking around with clipboards saying, nope, this one looks suspicious. Send it to recycling. But prions are different because when the prion protein misfolds into a dangerous shape, it does something horrifyingly clever. It does not sit there being wrong. It convinces other normal proteins to fold the same wrong way. One bad fold becomes two. 2 becomes 4. 4 becomes a pile. The pile becomes damage. It is not spreading by reproduction, it is spreading by influence. A bad shape teaching good shapes how to become bad shapes. That is part that makes your brain pause because we used to thinking of disease as an enemy with the body, but this is more like a corrupted pattern, a biological rumor, a shape that says stand like me, and the normal proteins obey. That is why this mystery was so hard to accept. A disease without genetic material, an infection thing without DNA or RNA, a killer that is not alive. That sounded impossible. For years, the idea was controversial because science does not like answers that sound like someone whispered them during a thunderstorm. Science wanted proof. And honestly, fair. If someone walks into a lab and says, I think the infectious agent is just a misfolded protein, you do not immediately hand them a trophy. You ask them follow up questions like, excuse me, what? But eventually, the evidence kept pointing there. The disease causing agent was not behaving like a normal virus. It resisted things that should have damaged genetic material. It was usually hard to destroy. And the protein misfolding idea explained what other theories struggle to explain. The suspect was not missing. Scientists have been looking for a wrong kind of suspect. They were searching for a living invader. The invader was a shape. That is the kind of scientific twist I love. Not because it is scary, although yes, it is standing in the corner wearing a little scary hat, but because it shows how reality can be rude. We make categories alive, not alive, infectious, not infectious, safe, dangerous, and then nature walks and flips the table and says, cute boxes. Prion sits in that uncomfortable borderland. They are not alive, but they can spread diseases. They do not think, but they create consequences. They do not want anything, but they can destroy a brain. This is almost more disturbing than a monster. At least a monster has motives. A monster can be dramatic. A prion is just chemistry having a very bad day. Now, to be clear, because I do not want anyone watching this and suddenly treating every sandwich like a suspect in a courtroom, prion diseases are rare. Very rare. You do not catch them from sitting next to someone. You do not catch them from a hug. You do not catch them because somebody sneezed near your fries. This is not a casual everyday infection. Prion diseases usually happen in specific ways. Some arise spontaneously for reasons we do not always understand. Some are inherited because of the mutation in the gene related to the prion protein. Some are acquired through exposure to infected tissue, which is why contaminated medical instruments or certain animal products have mattered historically. But again, it's rare. This is not a panic about lunch video. This is a how is biology this weird video. Because the deeper question is not, should I be afraid of prions every day? No. The deeper question is, how did something so simple break one of our assumptions about life? Because prions forced scientists to take protein shape seriously in a new way. And once you understand that, you start seeing the world a little differently. The body is not only made of chemicals, it is made of arrangements, patterns, shapes, timing, structures. A protein can be made of the right ingredients and still be wrong. Same part, wrong form. Like building a chair from all the correct wood pieces, but accidentally assembling it into a weaponized coat rack. The material is not the whole story. The arrangement matters. That is true in the brain too. The brain is not just a lump of cells. It is connections, signals, timings, loops, maps, rhythms. A tiny change in arrangement can change memory, movement, identity, reality. And prions are one of the harshest reminders that biology is not just about what something is made of, it is about what shape it takes. There is another reason this topic feels so strange. Most infections feels like invasion. Something from outside comes in, a virus enters, a bacterium multiplies. The immune system fights. There is a war story, but with prions, the enemy looks uncomfortably familiar. The normal prion protein already exists in the body. The dangerous form is a distorted version of something that belongs there. That is a different kind of horror. Not something foreign entered, but something familiar changed shape. The brain does not get attacked by a stranger in a mask. It gets destroyed by a misfolded version of its own material. That is why the phrase, the disease that isn't alive, works. Because it does not behave like the usual villain. It does not storm the castle. It teaches the stones of the castle to collapse. And the damage can be devastating because neurons are precious. Brain cells are not like skin cells. You cannot just casually replace large amounts of brain tissue like changing bed sheets. The brain has limited ability to recover from certain kinds of damage. So when misfolded proteins accumulate, the consequences can be severe. Movement can change, personality can change, memory can vanish, sleep can collapse, reality can become unstable. A person can become less and less able to live inside the world they once knew. And that is where we have to be careful. Because this topic is fascinating, but it is also real suffering. Behind every rare disease is not just a case study, it's a person, a family, a room where someone is trying to understand why their loved one is changing. So, the mystery is not entertainment only, it is also warning about how much we still don't know. The brain is not a machine where every part has a nice little label. It is more like a city at night, lights turning on, signals crossing, quiet maintenance crew worker working underground. And with prion disease, something goes wrong at one of the most basic levels, shape. A protein folds wrong, then another and another, and suddenly the city starts losing streets. They only need one thing, a structure that can copy itself through contact. The idea is bigger than disease because it makes you think about all the patterns that spread without being alive. A rumor spreads, a panic spreads. One person yawns, and suddenly the whole room is participating in a tiny unpaid experiment. And of course, those are not prions. I'm not saying your group chat is a neurodegenerative disorder. But the comparison is useful because sometimes the thing that spread is not an organism, it's a pattern, a structure, a behavior, a shape. That is why prions feel like a crack in the wall. You look through it and realize the universe has more categories than we thought. Imagine telling someone a few hundred years ago, one day doctors will find a disease that spreads because a protein is folded wrong. They may stare at you and ask if the protein is cursed, and honestly, understandable, because even now, with modern science, the idea feels cursed. But it is not magic, it is molecular structure. And sometimes molecular structure is dramatic enough without adding a cape. The story also shows why scientific mysteries take time. From the outside, we sometimes act like science should immediately know everything. A mystery appears, a scientist squints at it, 5 minutes later, answer. But real science is usually messier. People disagree, hypotheses fail, tools are limited, evidence comes slowly. One generation asks the question, another generation builds the instrument, another generation finally sees the answer. Prions were not obvious. They were not waiting with a name tag. And the scientist who pushed the prion idea, Stanley Prusner, faced skepticism before the theory became widely accepted. That is normal. New ideas should be tested hard. If a claim changes rule, it has to survive the fire. And this one did. The discovery became important enough to win the Nobel Prize. Not because it was spooky, because it changed biology. It gave science a new kind of infectious agent, a new way disease could work. To be clear, diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are not the same thing as classic prion diseases. You should not hear misfolded proteins and instantly throw every brain disease into the same box. But researchers do study how misfolded proteins can spread or accumulate in different brain disorders. The big idea matters. When proteins lose their correct shape, the consequences can be enormous, and prions are the most extreme version of that lesson. Your brain, your memories, your body, your sense of self, all of it depends on tiny structures doing the right thing at the right time, and most of the time they do. That is a miracle hiding inside ordinary life.